The first thing Daniel Grayson saw when he stepped into the nursery wasn't the gold crib he imported from Italy. It wasn't the hand-painted wallpaper or the delicate lace curtains his wife had chosen months before their daughter was born. It was the maid, curled on the hardwood floor, her arms wrapped protectively around his baby girl, both of them asleep as though the world outside didn't exist. His heart slammed in his chest, anger cutting through him before thought could catch up. "Get your hands off her," he barked, his voice sharper than the crack of a whip. "You think you can sleep next to my child like you belong here?" The woman jerked awake, eyes wide, but the movement startled the baby. A high, piercing cry filled the room, raw, desperate, aching. And when Daniel tried to take her, those tiny fists clawed the air, reaching back toward the maid with a need he couldn't understand. That sound would haunt him for the rest of his life. And it was only the beginning of a chain of events that would rip apart every carefully guarded secret in his perfect home. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why would a billionaire walk into his child's nursery and find the maid asleep on the floor instead of in the perfectly made bed just 3 feet away? Why would a man like Daniel Grayson, who prided himself on order, status, and control, be met not with a simple explanation, but with the sight of his daughter screaming in someone else's arms, her tiny body trembling as though the world had ended the moment he pulled her away? What was it about Maya Johnson, a woman hired to clean and serve, that made Lily cling to her like she was the only safe place in the world? And what exactly did Daniel discover in the hours after that confrontation? Something so unsettling that it shifted the ground under his feet and left questions no father wants to ask. Weeks later, police officers would walk up the marble steps of the Grayson estate, notebooks in hand, their expressions tight. They weren't there for a courtesy visit. They were there because someone inside that mansion had answers they needed, and someone else was hiding the truth. Maya Johnson was not a woman who asked for much. In her mid-30s, she carried the quiet grace of someone who had known both love and loss. Just a year earlier, she had buried her husband after a sudden illness, left her with more bills than memories, forcing her to leave the small apartment they'd shared for over a decade. She came to work for the Graysons not because she dreamed of serving in a mansion, but because the job promised stability, a steady paycheck, a roof over her head, and work she knew she could do well. Within days of her arrival, it became clear that children trusted her in a way adults rarely did. Her voice was soft but firm, her movements gentle but sure. She didn't just tend to Lily, she seemed to understand her, to anticipate her needs before the child even cried. Daniel Grayson, on the other hand, was a man defined by control. In his early 50s, he had built an empire in real estate, turning empty lots into towering glass monuments to his ambition. He was the kind of man who noticed fingerprints on a polished banister, the kind of man who kept staff and family in separate worlds, even under the same roof. To him, boundaries were not suggestions, they were rules. And Maya's growing closeness with his daughter was a boundary he was beginning to see as dangerous. Lily was 9 months old, with a head full of dark curls and a stubborn streak that rivaled her father's. But she had one weakness. She would not sleep, not for her father, not for the nanny who came before Maya, not for anyone except the woman who now lived 2 floors below the nursery. It was this bond that drew Daniel's silent disapproval. He never spoke of it directly, but his glances, his pauses before leaving a room where Maya held Lily, said enough. In private, he told himself it was about discipline, about ensuring his daughter grew up independent. But deep down he could not shake the uneasy feeling that his child loved someone else more than she loved him. And somewhere in the future, though neither of them could yet see it, a police detective would stand in that same nursery, holding a broken baby monitor in his hand, studying it as though it held the answers to a question no one dared to ask. That was the last peaceful week in the Grayson mansion. It was just after midnight when Maya Johnson stirred in her small room on the lower level of the Grayson mansion. At first, she thought the sound was part of a dream, but then she heard it again. Lily's cries, sharp and rising in pitch, cutting through the thick silence of the house. Maya had learned early on that when Lily cried like this, no lullaby from a distance, no gentle pat on the back from the crib's edge, would soothe her. Slipping into her slippers, she made her way upstairs, her footsteps silent on the grand staircase. In the nursery, Lily's face was blotchy with tears, her tiny fists clenched, her body thrashing in the soft confines of the crib. Maya lifted her, pressing the child to her chest, rocking slowly, humming low and steady. But tonight, it wasn't enough. The cries wouldn't stop, each wail a punch to the heart. She shifted, lowering herself to the plush rug, lying back so Lily could rest against her heartbeat. Gradually, the tension left the baby's body, the cries fading to hiccups, then to the steady rhythm of sleep. Without meaning to, Maya's own eyes drifted shut. She didn't hear the front door open an hour earlier than expected. She didn't hear the heavy steps on the stairs or the pause outside the nursery door. Daniel Grayson stood in the doorway, taking in the scene. His face hardened instantly. The gold crib stood unused, the expensive sheets untouched, while his only daughter slept against the chest of the woman he paid to serve in his house. "Get your hands off her." The words ripped from him like a gunshot. Maya jolted awake, confused, her arms tightening instinctively around Lily. The sudden movement woke the baby, who began to scream, a sound so desperate it made even Daniel's jaw twitch. He reached down, pulling Lily from her, but the child's cries grew frantic, her little arms flailing toward Maya. "This is not your place," Daniel said through clenched teeth. "You are here to clean, not to... this." His voice faltered as Lily's wails filled the air. Seconds stretched, his knuckles whitening as he held his daughter, who refused to be soothed. Finally, with a sharp exhale, he handed her back. The moment Lily's head found Maya's shoulder, the cries stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel said nothing more. He turned and left the room, his footsteps heavy, his eyes colder than winter glass. From that night, things began to shift. The security cameras in the nursery were repositioned. Doors that had always been unlocked were now secured at night. Maya noticed the change but said nothing, carrying on with her work, though the air in the house felt different, charged, uneasy. But 2 nights later, Daniel didn't just watch, he recorded. The morning after Daniel Grayson recorded what happened in the nursery, the mansion's rhythm changed. Conversations between staff were quieter, glances were sharper, and there was a sense that every word could be repeated to the wrong person. Daniel began pulling aside members of the household one by one, his questions direct and cold. "Has Maya Johnson crossed any boundaries? Has she been anywhere she shouldn't?" Some answered quickly, eager to keep their jobs. Others hesitated, their silence speaking louder than words. Mrs. Carter, the long-serving housekeeper, didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied Daniel for a moment, before saying, "There are things in this house you wouldn't want outsiders to know." Her tone carried the weight of someone who had seen more than she should have, and Daniel didn't press her for details. Not yet. Within a week, the walls of the Grayson estate seemed to have ears. Someone leaked a story, anonymous but clearly from inside the household, to a local gossip site, hinting at tension between the billionaire and a member of his staff. The article was vague, but it was enough to make the Grayson name start circulating in the media. Daniel was furious, but before he could contain the damage, a new crisis erupted. There was an incident in the nursery, a moment where Lily's breathing became erratic and emergency services were called. No one outside the household knew exactly what happened, but by the next day, police officers were at the mansion's gates. Their questions were precise. Who had been with the baby in the hours before? Who had access to the nursery? Daniel told them Maya was overstepping, that she was becoming too attached, too involved, in ways that made him uncomfortable. Maya, in turn, told the officers she believed something was wrong with Lily's health, something Daniel was either ignoring or deliberately hiding. The air in those interviews was tense, every answer laced with suspicion. Was Maya simply a devoted caretaker whose warnings were being dismissed? Or was she hiding something about her past that could explain her closeness to the child? And what about Daniel? Was his obsession with control a father's instinct to protect? Or was it masking something far more troubling? False leads began to swirl. Someone claimed to have seen Maya in areas of the mansion she had no reason to be in. Another suggested Daniel had a history of ignoring medical concerns if they might tarnish his public image. Every thread the investigators pulled seemed to fray into more questions than answers. And then an unexpected witness came forward, with footage. The footage that surfaced did not come from Daniel Grayson's private collection of security recordings, though everyone assumed it would. It came from a small, motion-activated camera hidden in the nursery by an unexpected source, one of the junior staff members who claimed they had only installed it to keep an eye on things after sensing tension in the house. The video was time-stamped 2 weeks before Daniel found Maya Johnson sleeping on the floor with Lily. It began with the faint sound of a restless baby, soft whimpers turning into short, sharp cries. The crib came into view, Lily tossing her head from side to side, her breathing shallow and uneven. The footage caught every detail: the arch of her back, the faint blue tinge beginning to touch her lips. Then the door opened, and Maya appeared. There was no hesitation in her movements. She scooped the baby up, holding her upright against her shoulder, gently rubbing her back while murmuring softly. For long minutes she stood there in the dim light until Lily's breaths became steady again. The part that silenced the room was what happened next. Maya didn't return Lily to the crib. Instead, she sank down to the rug, leaning her back against the crib's frame, the child still in her arms, watching her closely until her own head began to nod forward in exhaustion. This was not an act of defiance. It was an act of vigilance. Daniel's fury on the night he walked in had been built on a misunderstanding. But the footage revealed something far more important. A medical examination, conducted after the incident that brought the police to the mansion, confirmed what Maya had been trying to explain. Lily had a rare, undiagnosed respiratory condition that caused dangerous drops in oxygen while she slept flat on her back. It was not a matter of comfort or preference. It was a matter of survival. Every night Maya had chosen the floor over the crib. Every time she kept Lily pressed against her chest, she had been preventing something far worse. The so-called inappropriate closeness had likely saved the baby's life more than once. Yet even as the truth settled over the Grayson mansion, one reality remained unchanged. Daniel Grayson was not a man who conceded easily. His pride was a fortress, and what he did next would turn the mansion into a war zone. Daniel Grayson was a man who could turn any situation into a controlled transaction, and this one would be no different. The day after the footage surfaced and the medical report confirmed Maya Johnson had been right all along, he called his attorney and began arranging for her quiet dismissal. There would be no public firing, no scene. He intended to offer a generous severance package, a confidentiality agreement, and a car waiting at the curb to take her away from his home forever. He told himself it was for the best, that removing her would restore order, that it would protect his family's reputation. But the staff had seen the footage too, and not all of them were willing to stay silent. Whispers began in the kitchen and corridors, whispers that carried a warning. If Maya was pushed out after saving that child's life, someone would talk. The threat was not shouted, but Daniel understood it. Still, he pressed forward with his plan. Maya, learning of her imminent departure, packed her belongings without a word. She had no intention of fighting him. She had already decided she would take work where her skills mattered more than her status, at a children's hospital in the city. On her final night in the mansion, the air was heavy with unspoken goodbyes. But just after 2 a.m, a sound tore through the silence. Not the restless cries of a waking baby, but the terrifying absence of sound. Maya, halfway through folding the last of her clothes, felt a chill grip her spine. She ran to the nursery. Lily lay in her crib, her small body still, her chest barely moving. Training and instinct took over. Maya lifted her from the crib, checked her airway, and began infant CPR with steady, measured compressions. Seconds felt like hours until a fragile gasp broke the air. Daniel, drawn by the commotion, stood in the doorway watching it unfold, his daughter's life cradled in the hands of the woman he was about to send away. The paramedics arrived minutes later, taking over as Maya stepped back, her face pale but calm. She didn't look at Daniel. The next morning, the mansion was unnaturally quiet. At breakfast, Daniel approached Maya, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it. He offered her a permanent position, a salary increase, and a suite on the same floor as the nursery. She listened, nodded once, and declined. Her decision had been made. She would not stay in a place where her value was recognized only in moments of crisis. Within a week, she began work at the children's hospital, where her skill and compassion were not just accepted but celebrated. For Daniel, the lesson lingered like an echo he couldn't ignore. Sometimes the people we undervalue are the ones quietly holding everything together until the moment we realize we can't afford to lose them. Was Daniel Grayson's initial anger toward Maya Johnson the reaction of a protective father, or was it the pride of a man who couldn't bear to admit someone else knew what was best for his child? Should he have trusted her from the beginning, or was his caution understandable given the boundaries he believed should never be crossed? And what about you? If you were in Daniel's place, could you forgive someone you thought had overstepped, only to learn they had been quietly saving your child's life all along? These are questions that reach beyond the walls of the Grayson mansion, touching on trust, humility, and the ways our judgments can blind us to the truth. Let us know in the comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help shape the stories we share. And if you thought this was shocking, wait until you hear about the wealthy heiress who accused her driver of kidnapping, only to discover the truth in her own basement. That story is one you will not want to miss, and it's coming soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it.